Once the most beautiful woman in Europe, the Countess of Castiglione lived a life of passion and intrigue, nobility defied, lovers ensnared, and secrets traded. But as her beauty faded, so did her grip on reality. Madness crept in, and she became a recluse, haunted by the shadows of her former glory. Join me to find out what happened to her. Virginia Oldowini Raffaellini was born on the 23rd of March 1837 in the city of Florence, the capital at that time of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. Italy had been divided into dozens of small states since the High Middle Ages, of which the Grand Duchy of Tuscany had been one of the largest since the 16th century. Virginia's parents were part of the minor nobility here. Her father, Filippo Oldowini Raffaellini, was a Tuscan marquis, and her mother was Isabella Lamporecchi, who hailed from a family of the minor Genoese nobility. Virginia's father was an ambitious diplomat who travelled a lot and neglected his family. So, Virginia was largely raised in the household of her maternal grandfather, Ranieri, a distinguished jurist known in his time. Affectionately named Nikia by her family, she grew up with the privileges of her social class. Her education included mastering English and French, learning to dance gracefully, and developing musical skills that reflected the refined world she was born into. From a young age, it was obvious to everyone who met Virginia, she was destined to be a stunning beauty. Her captivating looks earned her another nickname, the Pearl of Italy, and by her teenage years, she had become the object of desire for countless men. Shockingly, her parents didn't just turn a blind eye, but at times encouraged this, hoping the attention would lead to a wealthy husband. Eventually, it did. In 1854, a few months before her 17th birthday, she married Francesco Verassis, the Count of Castiglione. He was an aristocrat of the Lombardy region who was 12 years her senior. They were wed in the spectacular Florence Cathedral, and she would remain known forever thereafter as the Countess of Castiglione. A year after the wedding, the Countess gave birth to a son, Giorgio, but the marriage was far from a fairy tale. The Countess felt no love for her husband, and even before walking down the aisle, whispers of scandal surrounded her. Well, she was rumoured to have had a brief but passionate affair with a dashing naval officer. Virginia had only agreed to the union out of a duty to her family, who were thrilled at the prospect of linking their name to a prestigious noble house. The marriage did have its advantages for her though. She obtained a noble title, a vast fortune, and the freedom to immerse herself in high society. Following her marriage, the Countess was spending a growing amount of time at the foremost court of northern Italy. This was in the capital of the Kingdom of Sardinia, in the city of Turin. This kingdom ruled over northwestern Italy, along with the island of Sardinia. Also, it was increasingly viewed as a power which might unite Italy under its rule, especially so from 1848 onwards, when a series of revolutions swept across Europe, creating a new wave of Italian nationalism at that time. The Countess's ties to the court in Turin weren't just through her marriage, they also came from her powerful family connections. Her cousin Camillo Benso, Count of Cavour, served as Prime Minister to Victor Emmanuel II, King of Sardinia. By 1855, when her son was born, Virginia was firmly entrenched in the glamorous life of the Piedmontese court. But her story wouldn't end there. France was cooling, and the next chapter of her life was about to begin. It was through her cousin the Count of Cavour that the Countess became associated with both Emperor Napoleon III and the dazzling city of Paris. Napoleon III was the nephew of the legendary Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who had conquered most of Europe early in the 19th century. Napoleon III had emerged as the head of the Second French Republic following the 1848 Revolution in France, and had subsequently declared himself to be the ruler of a new Second French Empire in 1852, with the regnal name Napoleon III. In the 1850s, Italy was at a crossroads. The Italian states were plotting a war against the Austrian Empire, which held sway over Milan, Venice, and much of northern Italy. The goal? To drive out foreign rule and create a unified Italy. Napoleon III and the French emerged as a key potential ally in this fight. By late 1855, Camillo Cavour had devised a bold plan. He wanted to send his 18-year-old cousin Virginia to the French court with a secret mission, charm Emperor Napoleon III by any means necessary, and I mean any means necessary, to secure his support for Italy's cause. The Countess accepted this mission, and now her beauty and charm were about to become weapons in the battle for Italy's future. Thus, in early 1856, accompanied by her husband and son, the Countess set off for Paris, and it didn't take long for her to make a great impression. Once introduced to the royal court, she quickly caught the eye of the 47-year-old emperor. Though married since 1853 to the devout and reserved Empress Eugénie de Montijo, Napoleon was infamous for his womanizing ways, and the Countess soon became his mistress. She was a welcome distraction, especially as his wife had stopped sharing his bed, finding it disgusting and difficult to bear. But Virginia's time in Paris wasn't just about romance. From the French capital, she secretly sent reports back to Turin, keeping her cousin and the Piedmontese government informed of crucial developments here. During this time, the Countess took the world of European royalty by storm. She mingled with figures like Augusta of Saxe-Weimar, Otto von Bismarck, Adolphe Thiers, and many more. Her beauty and dramatic flair were legendary, often turning heads at the imperial court with her elaborate costumes, including her iconic Queen of Hearts outfit. With long, wavy blonde hair, a fair complexion, and mesmerizing eyes that shifted between green and violet blue, she captivated everyone, at least initially. Her charm, however, came with one fatal flaw: her vanity. While she could enchant at first glance, her self-absorption often bored her admirers, with one contemporary remarking, "After a few moments, she began to get on your nerves." This narcissism is demonstrated in her later years when she wrote of herself, "The Eternal Father did not realize what he had created the day he brought her into the world. He formed her so superbly that when it was done, he lost his head at the contemplation of his marvelous work." In 1857, after a year at the French court, her personal life unraveled. Her husband Francesco left her after she openly flaunted her affair with Napoleon III and drained his finances with her extravagant lifestyle. He eventually returned to Italy furious, declaring their split as irrevocable. Not long after, the Countess's glittering reign in Paris came to an abrupt end. In April of that year, Napoleon III narrowly survived an assassination attempt while visiting her one evening. Rumours swirled that the Empress herself had orchestrated this to bring about the Countess's downfall. Whether this was true or not, the damage was done. A scandal soon erupted, and she was forced to leave the city. Her job had otherwise been well done. When a fresh war broke out in April 1859 between Austria and Sardinia-Piedmont, the French sided with the Piedmontese and helped them take control of Milan and much of the rest of northern Italy from the Austrians in a very brief conflict. 2 years later, a Kingdom of Italy was formed under Piedmontese leadership. While the war was ongoing in northern Italy, Virginia eloped for a time to London. Ultimately, she ended up returning to Paris. By then, her relationship with Napoleon III had soured, and she had fallen completely out of favour at court. Despite this, she was still highly regarded for her beauty, and many powerful men paid for her company. One observer, Gaston Jolivet, wrote that, "There has never been another woman, at least not in my lifetime, in whom immortal Venus, as deified by the brushstrokes and chisels of the great masters, was more perfectly incarnate. Another contemporary, Pauline de Metternich, echoed these sentiments, begrudgingly though, as she otherwise despised the Italian countess. It was during this return stint in Paris in the 1860s that Virginia became a model of sorts for the first time. The first commercial daguerreotype cameras had only become available in the 1840s, and photography first came of age at the same time as the Countess did in the 1850s. In Paris at the beginning of the 1860s, she entered into collaboration with one of France's pioneering portrait photographers, Pierre-Louis Pierson. Pierson would photograph many of Europe's rulers and leading aristocrats over a long career. In Paris in the early 1860s, he produced dozens of portraits of the Countess, some with her posing wearing masks and in elaborate dress, others in almost surreal settings. These were not mere photographs. They were artistic experiments. Moreover, the Countess was not a passive model. She devised many of the setups and was Pierson's collaborator throughout. Pierson's lens didn't just capture her, he immortalized her son Giorgio, her beloved dogs, and most importantly, her vision. On one occasion, Virginia made use of her talents by sending her ex-husband one of her photographs. This was in response to an attempted custody claim of their son by accusing her of being unfit to be a mother. In the photograph, the Countess was elegantly dressed in a lavish gown, and at first glance it seemed harmless, but there was a hidden detail. In the folds of her dress, Virginia was holding a knife. To drive her point home, she entitled the image, "The Revenge." The message was crystal clear, and it worked. Virginia retained custody of Giorgio for the rest of his life. By the end of the 1860s, hundreds of portraits of the Countess were produced, each more striking than the last. The Countess had a good life and was likely the world's first supermodel, but soon it would take a tragic turn. Virginia was still living in Paris in the autumn of 1870 when the Franco-Prussian War erupted. The war had been orchestrated by Prussia, the largest of the northern German states, as part of the plans of the Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck to unify Germany under Prussian leadership through a series of wars. He skillfully exploited a diplomatic crisis over the succession to the Spanish throne in 1870 to encourage the French to declare war on Prussia. When they did, the Countess found herself in an unusual position. She had met Bismarck many years earlier and knew him well enough that she was requested to act as an emissary for the French government to the Prussian statesman. Virginia agreed to do so, although her intervention proved fruitless, and in the end, the French lost the war, and the Second French Empire of Napoleon III collapsed. He abdicated and went into exile, and the German Empire was formed in 1871 under Prussian domination. Under the Third French Republic, the once glamorous Countess of Castiglione found herself living a far more austere existence. The millions of francs she'd amassed from her late ex-husband and countless admirers were gone, leaving her to scrape by in a modest apartment in the heart of Paris. In the early 1870s, she could still be spotted around the city, a shadow of her former self, but still recognizable to those who remembered her dazzling prime. As the years passed, so did her fame. In 1872 her mother died, and this marked the start of Virginia's gradual decline. Tragedy struck in 1879 when her only son Giorgio died at just 24 years of age. This devastating loss shattered the Countess, exacerbating her already unstable mental health and reclusive tendencies. By the 1880s, the woman who had once captivated emperors and commanded the attention of Europe's elite was all but forgotten by society. The Countess continued to live in Paris during her later years. This was a vibrant period of French culture, La Belle Époque, a time when the French capital was the most cultured city in the world, and artists, libertines, and bohemians flocked here. It's no surprise that the younger generations grew curious about the Countess, eager to hear the story of a woman who once captivated Parisian society decades earlier. One man in particular who was interested in her was Robert de Montesquieu, himself a dilettante symbolist poet, and possible inspiration for Oscar Wilde's titular character in the picture of Dorian Gray. He never managed to meet her during her lifetime, but he began collecting hundreds of her photographs and other items associated with the Countess during her lifetime. Unfortunately, while Montesquieu might have idolized her, the Countess's later years were quite tragic. As the beauty that once defined her faded, so did her mind. Unable to face the ravages of age, she transformed her apartment at the Place Vendôme, destroying every mirror and decorating it completely black, with every blind drawn. For the last 2 decades of her life, she lived as a recluse. Her behavior grew more erratic, a clear sign of her mental instability, and she only ventured out at night, veiled and shrouded in secrecy. Despite this isolation, in the late 1890s she did re-establish contact with Pierson and sat for new photographs. She attempted the flirtatious poses that had once captivated audiences, but the results were unsettling, even haunting. The photos revealed a broken figure, a lonely, toothless, likely mad alcoholic, draped in tattered gowns from a bygone era. Her sense of irony, however, had not abandoned her. During this period she developed an idea to put on a show at the World's Fair, scheduled to be held in Paris from April to November 1900, one which the Countess intended to entitle as "The Most Beautiful Woman in the World." Her ambition was never realized. On the 28th of November 1899, she died at home in Paris. She was 62 years old at the time and was laid to rest at the famous Père Lachaise cemetery in the French capital. Montesquieu continued his interest in the Countess's life and work after her death. He spent 13 years working on a book which was based around her, and it was finally published in 1913 entitled The Divine Countess. 3 decades later, a film of her story named The Countess of Castiglione was directed by Flavio Calzavara. It was released in 1942 and starred Doris Duranti as the Countess. A second screen treatment, The Countess's Secret, was released in 1954 and starred Yvonne De Carlo as the Countess. Her life has also inspired numerous other books and plays. The Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art in New York acquired 275 of her photographs that Montesquieu had collected nearly a century earlier, and today her legacy remains fairly strong. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on the Countess of Castiglione. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you want more videos like this of scandalous nobles, courtesans, let me know down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.